We're talking about an invasive plant that covers trees and fences called kudzu. It's so prolific that plant experts are warning you to be on the lookout.
This is kudzu. Zero plant diversity where there's kudzu.
People laughed when Alabamians treated kudzu like a real battlefield, using goats, fire, tractors, and constant cutting as if they were fighting an enemy rather than a plant.
It's crazy what it looks like too, because it looks like a fungus or something. Like it's so prevalent, like it just overwhelms everything and covers all the trees.
Here's the killer now.
Headlines dismissed the vine as just a weed, and critics asked, how hard can it be?
It's one of those really nasty vines that literally grows almost a foot a day under proper conditions.
What happened next stripped away that confidence. The measures that once looked excessive began to look necessary, and the idea that this was just another harmless vine did not survive what followed. The invitation nobody questioned.
Well, you never know what you're going to find. Get out of the environment. But in this case, kudzu.
Kudzu entered the United States without resistance or scrutiny. In 1876, it was brought from Japan to the Philadelphia Centennial Exposition and displayed as an exotic plant. People admired how fast it grew and how completely it covered whatever it touched. Nurseries quickly began selling it across the Southeast as a vine for shade and decoration. No one asked what would happen once it escaped gardens. No one tested how it would behave once it was no longer controlled.
I could see those main vines going way up in that tree. That is kudzu vine.
By the early 20th century, kudzu was no longer treated as decoration. It was promoted as a tool. When soil erosion became a national emergency and farmland was being stripped bare, the federal government intervened. The Soil Erosion Service paid farmers to plant kudzu across damaged land. Up to 85 million seedlings were distributed. Farmers were paid per acre to spread it as widely as possible. The consequences came fast. Kudzu did not remain in fields. In the warm and humid climate of the Southeast, it moved outward without restraint. It poured into forests, wrapped around trees, climbed telephone poles, and smothered buildings. Roadsides vanished beneath it. Entire sections of land were swallowed in a matter of seasons. What was meant to protect soil became an aggressive force that erased what was already there. Kudzu was especially destructive because of its biology. As a legume, it pulls nitrogen from the air and enriches the soil around it, giving it a powerful advantage over native plants. It spreads in every direction. Wherever its vines touch the ground, they can root and form new plants. One vine becomes many. Cutting it back only creates more points of growth. The real damage happens underground. Kudzu develops thick tuberous roots that store massive amounts of energy and water. In older infestations, these roots reach deep into the soil and grow extremely large. Removing the vines does almost nothing. Burning them does almost nothing. The plant survives and returns quickly. Many infestations are not made up of different plants, but of clones spreading from the same original source. A small number of introductions expanded into vast, continuous growth. Kudzu did not spread slowly. It overwhelmed. By the time its impact was fully understood, control was already nearly impossible, and the damage was deeply entrenched. By then, Alabama knew it was time to declare war. Why every solution failed.
You know, as soon as I cut it, it just grows back, so we're going to try to pull out.
Alabama declared war on kudzu, and the battlefield was brutal. First came the machines. Crews showed up with mowers, tractors, chainsaws, anything they could use to hack the vines back. But kudzu didn't go quietly. Its long, fibrous stems wrapped around blades and axles. Equipment bogged down. Engines choked on vines, and cut pieces left behind would sprout into brand new plants because kudzu can regrow from broken fragments. In many places, a single day of cutting turned into a bigger jungle than before. Then came the fire. On cold winter days, crews lit the dry vines, hoping to burn them back to nothing. And kudzu does burn the brittle, dry stems that go up quickly in flame, leaving behind a blackened, silent field that looks like a battlefield after retreat. But beneath that ash was another story. The real body of the plant, the root crowns and underground storage system buried deep in the soil, felt none of the heat. Within days of rain and warmer weather, bright green shoots would push straight up through the burned earth, reclaiming every inch as if the fire had never touched it. Prescribed burns can kill young vines, but mature roots survive and drive recovery. Herbicides came next. Landowners sprayed millions of gallons of commercial weed killers across kudzu patches. At first, kudzu leaves wilted and turned brown. It looked like progress, but complete eradication was rare. Because kudzu stores much of its energy in deep roots and crowns, killing above-ground vines often only weakens them temporarily. The plant has such a robust underground storage system that repeated chemical applications, sometimes for 5, 8, or even 10 years, are often needed to truly suppress it. No matter the tactic, cutting, burning, poisoning kudzu proved extraordinarily difficult to eliminate. Each attack on its visible growth was met with relentless regrowth from the parts people couldn't see. It wasn't that the plant was learning in a human sense, it was simply doing what it does best: survive. For decades, kudzu was known as fast, but by the late 20th century, something changed. Farmers across the southeast began noticing that the vine wasn't just spreading, it was recovering faster after winters, pushing into new areas and rebounding more aggressively than before. Many people brushed it off as warmer weather, but the growth didn't match past patterns. In the late 1980s, two researchers at Duke University, Thomas Sasek and Boyd Strain, decided to test a theory that sounded almost too simple. Humanity was releasing massive amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. What if kudzu responded to that carbon differently than other plants?
Here you can increase that by about 40%, so several more inches a day.
They grew kudzu in controlled environment chambers under 3 carbon dioxide levels, about 350 parts per million, which matched outdoor air at the time, 675 ppm and 1000 ppm. What they found was striking. Under the highest CO2 level, kudzu produced over 50% more total biomass, grew significantly longer vines, and developed far more branching than plants grown under normal conditions. Most native trees and plants do grow faster with extra carbon dioxide, but only up to a point. Kudzu didn't slow down the same way. Elevated CO2 amplified its growth far beyond what researchers saw in many competing species. Carbon dioxide also changed how kudzu handled water. Plants absorb carbon through tiny pores called stomata, but those pores also release water. Under higher CO2 levels, kudzu didn't need to open its stomata as much to fuel growth. That meant less water loss and higher drought tolerance. While native trees struggled under hotter, drier conditions, kudzu conserved moisture and kept expanding. The implication was unsettling. Rising atmospheric carbon dioxide wasn't just warming the climate, it was selectively empowering one of the South's most aggressive invaders. Kudzu wasn't evolving in intelligence, it was being physiologically boosted by the air itself. The invasion wasn't just spreading across the land, it was being fueled from above. The zombie soil. Kudzu doesn't just cover the ground, it changes the ground itself. Unlike most plants, kudzu is a nitrogen-fixing legume. It forms partnerships with bacteria in its roots that pull nitrogen out of the air and deposit it into the soil. In ecosystems where nitrogen is limited, that might sound helpful. Farmers even buy nitrogen fertilizer to boost crops, but kudzu packs much more nitrogen into the soil than native landscapes are adapted for. In sites invaded by kudzu, soil nitrate and nitrogen cycling rates can be dramatically higher than nearby uninvaded land, showing how much extra nitrogen the vine introduces. Native southern forests, pines, oaks, and wildflowers evolved in nutrient-poor soils where only certain species can thrive. When kudzu dumps excess nitrogen into that soil, the balance is upset. Native seedlings struggle to compete with faster-growing plants that take advantage of the extra nutrients.
While they might be small, the kudzu bug has created big problems for soybean producers.
Over time, the soil begins to favor invasive and opportunistic plants rather than the original forest species. But the hidden changes don't stop with nitrogen. A 2014 study by ecologists found that kudzu invasion can accelerate the breakdown of soil carbon. When kudzu leaves fall and decompose, they stimulate soil microbes to become more active. These microbes don't just eat the kudzu litter, they also begin decomposing older organic matter that had been stable for years. This effect, called a priming effect, releases carbon stored in soil back into the atmosphere. The researchers estimated that kudzu invasion could lead to the release of millions of tons of carbon annually from southern soils, amounts comparable to burning millions of gallons of gasoline or billions of pounds of coal each year. In other words, kudzu isn't just eating the land above ground, it's altering the chemistry and carbon balance below it, potentially contributing to broader environmental change. In 2007, a group of researchers led by graduate student Jonathan Hickman went into kudzu-infested fields in Madison County, Georgia, with soil gas analyzers and a simple question: does this invasive vine change more than just plant life? What they discovered wasn't just unusual, it connected kudzu directly to the air humans breathe. When the team compared soils under kudzu with nearby uninvaded soil, they found dramatically higher emissions of nitric oxide, NO, a nitrogen oxide gas that plays a central role in the formation of ground-level ozone. In plots dominated by kudzu, nitric oxide emissions were more than double those from soils supporting native vegetation, about 2.81 versus 1.24 nanograms of NO-N per square centimeter per hour. This increase was tied to kudzu's ability to fix nitrogen and accelerate nitrogen cycling in the soil. Nitric oxide itself isn't harmless. It's one of the key chemical precursors that, under sunlight in warm, humid conditions, reacts with volatile organic compounds to produce ozone, the main component of smog. High surface ozone levels contribute to respiratory problems, worsen asthma, and can stunt crop growth. Hickman's team didn't stop at soil measurements. They fed their data into climate and atmospheric chemistry models, including geochem, to see what it would mean if kudzu continued to spread across all non-urban land in the southeastern U.S. In that extreme scenario, the model projected that the number of summer days exceeding ozone health standards could increase by up to 7 days per season in states like Mississippi, Arkansas, and Tennessee. That's a 35% increase in unhealthy air days compared to a world without kudzu. What made the situation even more striking was that kudzu doesn't just influence one ingredient of ozone formation. The plant also emits isoprene, a volatile organic compound released from its leaves that participates in ozone-forming reactions. In combination with increased NO emissions from the soil, kudzu essentially supplies both sides of the ozone creation equation, a plant contributing to air pollution in ways most people never imagined. Alabama wasn't just battling a weed, they were up against a plant that was quietly becoming part of the region's air pollution problem too. The infrastructure collapse. Kudzu doesn't just cover the ground, it becomes part of the physical landscape, and that comes with a price tag.
See those vines? Those blooms?
Yep.
The vine's tendency to grow over anything in its path, trees, poles, fences, and buildings, creates ongoing challenges for infrastructure. Utility companies in the Southeast routinely spend millions of dollars annually just clearing kudzu from power lines and transmission rights-of-way to prevent outages and maintain service. Forestry crews and private landowners also devote significant time and money to chopping back vines that cling to poles, wires, and structures. Kudzu's impacts aren't limited to utilities. Railroads and transportation departments have to manage kudzu along tracks and roadsides because dense vine growth can obscure visibility, damage signage, and contribute to vegetation hazards. Economists and ecologists estimate the annual economic burden of kudzu in the United States at roughly $100 million to $500 million.
We still had kudzu and I hadn't killed it.
Those losses include reduced forest productivity as the vine smothers timber stands, control and maintenance costs, and damage to transportation and utility infrastructure. On private land, property maintenance becomes a year-round battle. Mechanical clearing, chemical treatments, and repeated mowing can range from hundreds to thousands of dollars per acre per year. And even then, there's no guarantee of lasting control. And kudzu isn't staying confined to the south. With warmer winters and shifting climate patterns, its range is expanding northward. Sightings of kudzu have been confirmed as far north as Pennsylvania and even into parts of Canada, where milder conditions allow vines to survive winters that once kept them at bay. What was once mocked as a weed is now recognized as a costly foe, challenging utilities, land managers, transportation agencies, and homeowners alike. In 2009, something unexpected appeared in Georgia that scientists hadn't seen before. Not a new vine, but a new insect. In Atlanta, researchers and residents began finding a small brownish-green bug about the size of a lentil, feeding voraciously on kudzu leaves. Scientists quickly identified it as Megacopta cribraria, commonly known as the kudzu bug, a species native to parts of Asia that had likely arrived in a shipping container or on cargo coming into the United States. At first, land managers and farmers thought they might have struck ecological lightning. Here was an insect that appeared to feed heavily on kudzu, the very plant so many in the southeast were battling. Early research documented that in heavy infestations, kudzu bug feeding could stunt kudzu growth and reduce its biomass, sometimes significantly, prompting excitement that this might help slow the vine's spread. But the story quickly took a turn. Kudzu bugs don't specialize only in kudzu. They feed on a wide range of legume species, and that includes one of the South's most economically important crops, soybeans. By 2011, soybean farmers in states like South Carolina and Georgia were reporting serious kudzu bug infestations in their fields. In some heavily infested soybean fields, yield losses were reported to exceed 40 to 60%, making the insect a major agricultural pest almost overnight. What started as potential biological control had become a new problem for farmers. It was a stark reminder that in complex ecosystems, a solution in one place can become a problem in another. Nature doesn't pick sides, it just keeps moving. What actually works? The future Alabama predicted. So is there any hope? Yes, but it isn't simple.
And of course, to try and manage, and that's really difficult.
It requires patience, consistent effort, and scientific know-how. The land managers and researchers who've made progress against kudzu all took the same approach. Integrated management, combining multiple tactics repeatedly over years, rather than hoping for one quick fix. One of the most effective strategies starts with timing herbicides correctly. Kudzu sends sugars down into its underground root masses, the tubers in late summer and early fall as it prepares for dormancy. That's when systemic herbicides are most effective because the plant moves the chemical deeper where it can affect the root system rather than just killing leaves above ground. University extension guides from states like Georgia and Alabama explain this timing strategy as a best practice for long-term suppression. Another key component is repeated cutting and grazing. Kudzu responds quickly to foliage removal, but frequent cutting can weaken the plant by repeatedly forcing it to draw on its energy reserves. Goats and other grazing animals are often used because they nibble vines close to the ground. However, it's not a one-season solution. Goats must be rotated and kept in place for extended periods to create lasting suppression, and follow-up treatments are still necessary. The third element is active restoration, replanting native grasses, shrubs, and trees that are adapted to the local soil conditions. Kudzu-invaded soil often has altered nutrient levels, especially higher nitrogen, so landowners may also use soil amendments and planting techniques that help native species compete. Re-establishing a healthy plant community helps shade out kudzu regrowth and builds resilience back into the ecosystem. Scientists are also investigating biological control, looking for natural enemies of kudzu in its native Asian range that could slow or reduce its growth without harming crops or native plants. Researchers have identified several insects and fungi that feed on kudzu in China and Japan, including species that defoliate leaves or bore into stems. But introducing a new species into a new land is risky. It requires years of testing to ensure it won't become a problem itself, as happened with other biological introductions in the past. There's also an intriguing idea on the economic front: using kudzu as a source of biofuel. Because it grows quickly and produces large amounts of biomass, some studies suggest kudzu could be harvested and processed for ethanol or other bioenergy products. One analysis estimated that kudzu stands might yield carbohydrate levels competitive with traditional biofuel crops like switchgrass or sugarcane, but it's early research, and scaling it into a true energy source would be expensive and complex. If anything, these approaches show that fighting kudzu may not be about eliminating it entirely, but about managing it smarter, combining science, labor, and time to turn an invasive liability into a controlled part of the landscape. Climate change is reshaping the map of who thrives where, and invasive species like kudzu are on the front lines of that shift. In the past, cold winters acted like a natural barrier holding kudzu in the southern United States. Freezing temperatures limited how far north the vine could survive and spread. But as winters warm, those natural limits are eroding. Research using climate models and habitat projections shows that invasive plants currently confined by cold are likely to expand their suitable habitat northward as minimum winter temperatures increase. For plants that couldn't previously survive harsher freezes, milder winters mean more days with temperatures above survival thresholds and fewer days below damaging lows. This pattern holds for a range of invasive species whose northern limits have historically been set by freezing conditions. Scientists have used species distribution models and climate projections to show that many invasive plants will find newly suitable territory farther north by mid-century and beyond. These models don't just apply to little vines. They're used to predict habitat suitability for invasive weeds and plants under warmer climate scenarios globally. Under projected warmer conditions, regions that were once too cold are now increasingly climatically favorable for invaders that historically couldn't survive there. For kudzu specifically, researchers have noted that its spread beyond its original southern range is consistent with temperature increases. Historically restricted by very low winter minimums, kudzu has already begun appearing farther north and east than it used to, likely because fewer cold extremes mean weaker climatic barriers. But kudzu isn't unique. Many invasive species are poised to shift their ranges in response to climate change, not just because of rising carbon dioxide, but because warmer winters and altered seasonal patterns change where different plants can live. These range shifts serve as a warning. When we change the climate, we don't just warm the planet, we redraw the boundaries of ecosystems and open doors for opportunistic species that once couldn't get a foothold. The lesson we ignored. They said Alabama was overreacting. They said it was just weed.
One theory for kudzu spread is climate change.
Or to keep the level of kudzu down so it doesn't spread.
They laughed at the farmers who spent their savings on goats and herbicides and fire. But Alabama wasn't being dramatic. They were seeing the future. They were watching in real time as a plant evolved into an ecosystem engineer, powered by the carbon we pump into the sky every single day. The takeaways are brutal but simple. Early warnings from people on the ground matter. You can't fight biology with mockery. And when you change the atmosphere, you're not just warming the planet, you're feeding whoever can use that change best. Kudzu figured out how to eat the modern world. The question is, what else is learning the same trick? If you want to dive deeper into the science or find out how to identify kudzu in your area, check the links in the description. And if you see kudzu spreading somewhere new, report it. Early detection is the only advantage we have left. Smash that like button if this story changed how you think about invasive species.
In addition to the kudzu bugs, there are grazers that you can use.
Subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden forces reshaping our world. See you in the next one.